Hey guys, I'm back in New York and I wanted to go over a catch-all question of how do you solve any problems or how do you learn any skill? And believe it or not, that in itself is a skill. There's a concept in startups called 500 mistakes. It's not a well-known concept. It's the idea that every startup makes the same 500 mistakes, or there's more 500 plus or minus several hundred mistakes that every startup can make. And another way to look at that is that if you know these mistakes, if you've made these mistakes, and or if somebody advising you has made these mistakes, you could, by process of deduction, become more successful in a more rapid fashion. I have evolved that 500 mistakes platform and framework to call it more of 500 questions. Essentially, every mistake could be a question, and if you ask that question ahead of time, or if you understand that learning ahead of time, you do not have to make that mistake, and you do not have to make as many mistakes. So if you think of a 2x2 matrix, you think of number of mistakes you have to make, and the other 2x2 matrix is the speed. Essentially, how quickly do you make those mistakes and how many mistakes do you have to make? That's who wins a market, all things being equal. What's important about this and the skill that's needed to be able to capture and learn any new skill is being able to ask those 500 questions. And the first thing that you need in order to do that is you have to be able to have domain expertise and be able to seek out somebody with domain expertise. One of the things in terms of experts that is a little bit overvalued is general intelligence, although important, is over-indexed. And domain expertise, in other words, specific experience within a certain vehicle, within a certain vertical or a certain part of the market or skill set, is undervalued. In other words, if somebody has 10 lower IQ points, but significantly more expertise and experience in a field, that experience is more valuable than the extra IQ points. Another way to look at this is, what is experience? There's a saying that some people have 10 years of experience of doing the same thing 10 times. In other words, 10 years of 1 year of experience. This could very well be the case if somebody keeps on doing the same job over and over. This is not something that's valuable. On the other hand, another person could have 10 years of experience in 1 year if they're in theory doing 10 times the amount of work or switching 10 times functions and going to a point where they're constantly learning on the go. In order to be able to gain that domain expertise and leverage the expertise of somebody else, there's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. The first is the removal of ego. It's important for whatever reason, depending on the society. The American society actually has a high respect for domain expertise. Other societies do not. It's one of the reasons American society has gone through kind of specialization and has become much more successful than other society. It's because the society values domain expertise. A lot of people, and I would say the average person, does not. Their personal opinion, no matter how unqualified or how non-domain specific, carries the weight. So the first thing is the removal of ego. Being able to rely on other people's expertise and other people's experience, in many ways takes a certain level of ego strength and or taming of the ego. The second, slightly more nuanced skill set is what's called Buddhism, called beginner's mind. In other words, the humility to essentially act like a child or come to the understanding as if you are a child. If you watch some of the top podcasters out there, you'll see that they ask very basic questions, and oftentimes they ask the same questions from multiple different experts because they understand they have the ego strength in order to do that. And they understand that in order to really have a bottoms-up understanding of a domain, you really have to come in as if you're a child. You have to ask very simple questions, and you have to ask very clarifying questions. For example, if you were asking about how to build muscle in the gym, you might say, what exercises do I do? How do I hold them? Should I do it towards exhaustion? Should I not? How many reps should I do? How often should I do them? What diet should I be doing? And you keep on asking these questions. In many ways, it leads to the next skill is you have to be okay with being annoying. It's very annoying in many ways to ask these somewhat obvious questions. A lot of times we fail to realize what we already know. So when somebody asks us, when you go to a nutrition coach or a weightlifting coach and they say, you ask them how many grams of protein you need to eat, to them it's obvious. So you're going to annoy them by asking these questions. You have to be okay with being annoying, because the outcome is much more important than looking smart or looking cool to the expert. The next strategy that's very effective is the iterative nature of these 500 questions. A lot of people will sit down and they'll ask all 500 questions, and then they'll go out and the process won't work. And that's the reason for that is nobody actually knows the 500 questions. Perhaps you only know 20 questions. Those 20 questions iterate out and end up being 500 questions over time. And they're not necessarily the same 500 questions for every startup. So you need to be able to embrace an iterative type nature to your questioning and iterative type nature to your coaching. That's why you don't just have an advisor that talks to you once and sits down, because you don't always know the questions to ask. In business, it's called the unknown unknowns. You don't know what you don't know. The next question and the final skill set is what I call micro questions, also known as pointed questions. Again, this falls under the concept of having it be okay to be annoying. Like I mentioned, you could ask, if you want to have medium success, you could say, how many grams of protein should I get? Or you should say, when should I eat? Should I eat in the morning? Should I eat in the evening? But if you really want excellence and you really want to master a field, you have to ask micro questions. You have to say, very specific questions like, what kind of protein, how much protein should I get? When should I get it? What other supplements should I get? Should I take them before? Should I take them after? Should I take them during? What happens if this does that? Does this matter? Does it matter if it's chicken or beef or plant protein? All these questions need to be asked. That's a way to, same thing with startups. You want to ask as many micro questions as possible to avoid any kind of uncertainty. Anybody that's good at achieving any result consistently looks at ways to de-risk the outcome, and you de-risk the outcome by relying on existing frameworks and existing schemas that have proven to be effective. So that is the systematic way and this overall skill set of how to gain any skill set. Hope that was helpful. Talk to you soon.